So just to make sure we have the full amount of time possible, I'd like everyone to join me in sincerely welcoming Dr. Carter Moulton to UCD virtually this afternoon. Carter is a faculty developer at the Colorado School of Mines, where he facilitates workshops in inclusive pedagogy, ungrading, and digital teaching practices. We happen to share an alma mater we found in Michigan State University as we got to know each other. And he's primarily here today to talk about analog inspiration, which is an incredible thinking tool that I've used in my own teaching. So I'm very excited he'll be able to share that with all of you and facilitate the discussion today. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Carter.
Thank you so much, Lee. It's so good to see you again and to be here digitally. I want to just, say good morning from the US. I'm in Denver right now, so different vibe over here, but looking forward to sharing a little bit about my work with you all, a little bit about my frustrations, and hopefully those will resonate with you and we can get some conversation going based on your own experiences. So I wanted to just share my talk is a little bit about what we mean by human-centered AI pedagogy. I'll get into that. And then just to introduce the Analog Inspiration Project, a little bit about why I made it, what I'm noticing, talking to students. I had the opportunity to talk to one of your student partners as well at University College Dublin. That was a treat. The more we can talk to students, of course, the more understanding we're going to gain. So I wanted to start just with a reflection. We've got so many messages about AI coming out, media messages, press releases, advertisements, new tools, and take a quiet moment just to think about what words, as you kind of survey the landscape of AI advertisements, what words are currently being used to describe its impact on our lives. Maybe you can think of 3 or 4 words. Hopefully you've got one word that comes to mind at least. And I will, I love it. Share it in the chat. Transformational. It's going to transform our lives. Absolutely. I want to share with you a few of the words that I'm seeing. Efficient. Yeah. Efficient's definitely on my list. These are some of the words that I'm seeing. So I see efficiency, acceleration, personalization. We're going to personalize learning. We're going to do things faster. We're going to be scaling. It's going to be easier. We're going to be more productive. Optimize, offload. These are some of the terms. And of course, there are many more terms that pop up in these discourses. And I invite actually as an activity, if you're able to invite students to actually pay attention to these words too. What kinds of discourses are being circulated about generative AI and how might that shape our understanding? Of course, my background and my dissertation is in media and cultural studies, and my dissertation was actually studying on how movie theaters kind of transition to reposition themselves in the age of streaming technologies as a place that's still worth going out. So I'm very interested in sort of the promotional aspect of these technologies and how narratives get shaped through those words. So of course, a quick glance here, we see things like offload complex tasks, make learning personal. This is just a quick scan of a few tools I did last week. More productivity, and then scale, bring AI at scale, plan lessons faster. So I wanted to ask, and part of my project asks, what if we actually approached AI through a different set of terms? These aren't terms I'm seeing very much of when we talk about generative AI in the classroom. And so something like joy or rest or community or truth, intention, perseverance, rather than efficiency, what about that skill of and mindset of trying again and learning from your mistakes? And so bringing that different shift, that shift in approach to AI, whether or not we want to use AI or not, right? Centering the things we so often see, we want to center what matters in this moment because AI is going to free us up to do what really matters. But what really matters, I think, is a question we need to be asking. And so part of this is kind of looking at the narratives that we see and those attributes and actually countering them almost as a mode of resistance in this moment as educators. For me personally, this card deck project comes out of a very skeptical, very frustrated, very fearful position where I do not like the way that this is being pushed out onto us by ed tech companies. I don't like the sort of uncritical adoption of tools to do tasks without that conversation. So, but at the same time, for me, something that I really care about in the classroom is trust and community and transparency. And I don't see that happening in the classroom a lot of the times um, with these conversations of banning, prohibiting, surveilling. So this balance between kind of being open about AI use while also skeptical. And in doing that, we can think about um, countering things like speed with slowness, countering scale with intimacy, gathering with a few folks in our community, countering this ease of producing deliverables with a little more difficult discussions with one another. And that's kind of why I made a card deck as opposed to a book or a worksheet or something. I really, as a gamer myself, I really do like the way that cards can foster those conversations and that intimate, communal um, discussion. And there's this piece from Raffagelli. I know Lee's seen this piece, but this idea of advocating for slowness as a mode of resistance in this moment where our fast-paced neoliberal demands of academia are just pushing us to produce, to publish, to take on more. And so when we approach AI through a lens of slowness, we're actually in a way countering what it's offering. And for me, I think that's a really important point of this. And that can happen at a grassroots level with our students in our classroom. It can happen in our centers for teaching and learning in our communities, having those discussions with one another, even when we don't know what we're doing, when we don't know what we should be doing. I think that's very important. And so I guess my thesis, I suppose, would be despite how frustrated and scared I am, and despite the sort of push to maybe add more surveillance tech into our classrooms and to sort of keep our teaching practices the same but protect them, I do think generative AI offers us an opportunity for us all to revisit what, why, and how we teach, and how we can build environments of curiosity and care with our students and for our students. And that's kind of the lens I took with creating this project. And for me, Stanford University's Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence Institute's been really helpful as a frame, almost a very accessible frame for thinking about what human-centered AI looks like. And they have these three tenets of human-centered AI: the idea that it should be guided for um, its concern for the impact not only on the user, but for society in general, at large, community. AI should be inspired by human intelligence, meaning we should be in the driver's seat intellectually of deciding what we use this tech for. And AI should augment, not replace human capabilities. So augmenting collaboration, augmenting obviously the sort of cognitive processes that we typically engage in when we learn. From a design perspective, we need to try to design AI systems that can enhance the qualities that make us human. So, of course, without these human-centered approaches, we're looking at a ton of crises right now, whether that's the crisis of truth, trying to understand how we verify and even help our students develop that information literacy to spot hallucinations. We have the intensification of human bias, of course, as these automated decision-making systems are embedded into our societies. What kinds of impacts on human lives are they going to have? How are those disproportionately kind of impacting folks in different communities? There's so many interesting studies. You know, the Warren Heath's piece on the hidden curriculum of AI and the way that reflective essays might be given different feedback based on indirect racial indicators. Something as simple as listening to classical music versus listening to rap music. Um, I'll share a few tools that I like to use with faculty and students in a second here. Of course, the environmental impacts. And at our own institution, we have students not wanting to use AI for ethical concerns. We have faculty not wanting to use AI for those same reasons, for environmental concerns. And then, of course, labor. I think the underground, sort of not much publicized, hidden human cost of the labor conditions of folks, the outsourcing of labor training for $2 an hour, exposing folks to violent content, and also, of course, the labor displacement that may occur in the future as well. So human-centered learning with AI, we start to think about what is learning. We start to, again, draw from traditions of student-centered learning, where we already focus on the individual. We focus on that whole human, but we also frame learning as a process, not a product. It's something that happens over time. I'll talk about that a bit more in a few minutes. And we want to center those human collaborations, connections, and relationships, emphasize where human critical oversight, where our creativity, where our contributions are going to be, and where they're needed, and then helping to develop that AI literacy along ethical awareness. Now, AI literacy, that can mean a lot of things. Um, Even something as working together as a team, I think, is interpersonal communication skills, professional communication skills, rhetorical analysis. These are all skills that are helping our students when they have to work with AI, and I'll get to this as well. It's not going to be isolated on a one-on-one human computer situation. It's going to be integrating that into a team. So negotiating norms about how are we going to use AI together? Who is accountable for what AI output? How do we negotiate people's different concerns? That's going to be key there as well. But of course, for a card deck, I wanted to just simplify it. And so a human-centered AI pedagogy, to me, it's a student-centered pedagogy that promotes, preserves, and really enhances or addresses human values, human skills, and human concerns. What are the values that we hold dear as humans? What are the skills we're going to need and we want to hold on to as humans? But what are we going to need to integrate AI into our lives? Um, or maybe there's skills that we want to preserve and say, this is a human endeavor. Human concerns, of course, being the sort of ethical um, concerns. And that brings me to the card deck project. And so each card, I created a 48 card deck, which I usually have with me at all times. I do not have, oh yeah, here we go. I do have one. So it's right here. Um, and it's sort of a tarot deck. Each card has a different value, concern, or skill on it. Things like trust, community, critical thinking, creativity, belonging, motivation, variety, bias. So a wide range of terms, and we'll get into, I'll show some of these cards today, including a few new ones, which I've never shown anyone. Well, I'm excited about that. And the idea is that alongside each value or skill is an easy way to integrate AI, in some cases resist AI, but kind of engage with AI to center that concept in your classroom. And so we're centering those values. And so there's two ways that folks can engage with the cards. They can kind of engage conceptually with that idea of trust. What does it mean? What does it look like for you in your classroom? What does hope look like? What does joy look like? And then on the other hand, a very practical way, almost like some sample prompts or sample ideas that you could then take into your classroom. So I also wanted to give some time to think about, if you want to drop in the chat, if you were to create a card, uh, even a hand of cards, let's say 3 to 5 cards, right? What kind of cards would you hold in your hand that would guide your teaching? What cards would those be as you move into your classroom and you kind of approach difficult teaching scenarios? What values would you hope to bring with you? And please do feel free to share your hand of cards in the chat if so inclined. Give folks a minute to reflect on that question. And this could include skills that you feel very strongly about that we need to, or concerns about AI as well. Mm. Respecting difference, creativity, critical thinking, entrepreneurial thinking. And we can return to those in a few minutes here. please do share with us. The other thing you might think about is starter packs. So if you're into cards like I am, you may have collected cards in the past. Remember the thrill of an aluminum foil card pack and ripping off the sort of uh, the foil to reveal what cards would be in there. I've also tried to think about different ways to engage users with the cards. So this is approximately 6 starter packs. These are kind of the themes of the deck. So we have the AI ethics cards that really lean into those ethics. But there's also the self-care piece because I don't think we're talking about that. And if we refer back to slowness and rest in this moment, given the productivity drive that we're having at our universities, um, that is crucial to our students. Also, our students are navigating, think about our students entering our classrooms. They may be entering 5 or 6 different AI policies. We've got one instructor saying, use this. This is going to be extremely important for your career. We've got another professor in the next hour saying, if you use this, I will report you. And so trying to make sense of this AI as a student um, is very, very challenging. So having that empathy and that self-compassion as well. So for instance, what would the AI ethics starter pack look like? So on the right here, you'll see bias. This is a card that is in the deck right now. And on the left here is the sustainability card, which is in an expansion pack, which I'll talk about more, but has not been released yet. So there's 2 tools that I like to use with faculty, and I would recommend reaching into your computer. I don't know, but opening your browser and bookmarking these pages. Whatusesmore.com is a tool by a professor at University of Maine, John Ippolito, and he's kind of compiled all of the very hazy, inconsistent data about energy and impact use of energy and water use of AI. And he's created this interactive tool where you can actually go in and compare the environmental impacts of using AI in comparison to, for instance, streaming Netflix or scrolling TikTok or using Zoom, trying to help have a conversation with our students about how AI use is integrated in and reflects and is different than maybe their daily energy use, just as digital consumers and citizens here. So if we have those students who don't want to use AI, I think first of all, respecting and honoring that critical thought and that moral conviction, but also maybe having an opportunity to invite students to engage with these tools to actually keep a journal of their daily energy use and reflect on that and talk about it as a course. And then maybe inviting students to think about data center training versus individual use, or what policies or regulations or what do we need to actually address this on a large scale. The other one, of course, is for the bias card. You might actually invite students to, rather than saying be aware of bias, you might actually task them with finding bias. You might actually task them with interrogating AI to find those biases, almost like investigators. For that tool, you might also pull up inequalities.ai. This is a map-based interactive tool. There's also a peer-reviewed research paper that came out in Platform and Society that is kind of linked to that. You can find it on the website, so you might also add that as a companion reading. But they took over 20 million ChatGPT prompts to try to find different ways that ChatGPT was talking about geographic regions. So they've mapped digital bias and inequality onto maps. I guess they mapped it onto maps. That makes sense. But so it's a very interesting tool. It's kind of a fun tool you can explore. Does ChatGPT think that this state has a better food culture than this state, or better access to healthcare? You can actually get some sense into what ChatGPT is giving people in their outputs and how that might relate to bias. Ton of different bias uh, peer-reviewed research coming out as well. Something like humor. How does bias show up in humor? If you give AI an image and you say, make this funnier, what does it do? And so, what we find is that we've starting to do a good job about protecting against politicized biases, but some of these more subtle biases, something like, for instance, in the study, when you say make something funnier, it continually added weight to the person, it made them older, and it gave them glasses. And so, kind of thinking about how bias, of course, reflects the biases that we hold, but inviting our students to engage that. So I want to just I kind of introduce the card project. We're going to explore some other cards, but we're going to do so a little bit differently. We're going to think about this aspect of redesigning our lives as educators, essentially, and what we're being asked to do. And so AI is in many ways challenging us to redesign our course policies, our course assessments, um, and our relationships. And I think this third one is kind of my big point. We need to redesign our relationships with students in this moment. And it's something that I'm not seeing talked about in the same way as the first two. So we'll end on that. I'll keep that sort of a suspense going. So what do we know? Okay, just really quickly, I don't love putting just a bunch of studies and quotes on here. So I got two slides that do that, and then we'll move on. But of course, we know that initial over reliance is sort of weakening those neural connections, maybe leading to a lower sense of ownership in work. And then occasionally, studies are coming out which suggest that when we remove AI after the task has occurred, we're having less memory recall and less ability to create those tasks that we once did with AI. That said, intentional AI integration, it's aligned with evidence-based pedagogy, can benefit learners. And the thing with all of these I want to say is I think an article came out from Stanford University 2 days ago that looked at over 800 pieces of literature, peer-reviewed literature on the impact of generative AI in education. And they narrowed that down to 20 studies that they found were of high quality, right? So we have a moment here where even our peer-reviewed research is coming out, it's making waves, it's changing discourses only to be corrected or sort of critiqued later on. And by that point, it may be too late for some of these ideas to circulate. So it's a very tricky time, but I do want to share some of these things. And then, of course, our students, just because they use AI doesn't mean that they're developing literacy skills and that confidence in um, their confidence in that ability to use AI doesn't necessarily reflect those skills. And a big one here, I like this top one is very important. I think it really does play into my philosophy as well, which is we need to be guiding our students in this moment. We cannot just be saying, please use AI at home on this homework for 30 minutes, right? That's not enough guidance. So we're in a moment where we need to scaffold and structure AI use and model AI use and really take the time to overbuild and over communicate that for our students. And then, of course, AI detection tools remain unreliable, biased, and substantial security risks. And a story here I want to share is in talking with students, I know that students at our institution and elsewhere are, if there is a culture of fear and a culture of anxiety and a culture of suspicion in the classroom, actually uploading their own work to these AI detection tools. I had a story of a student in a creative writing course uploaded their essay to the detection tool. They had completely written the paper, but it said that it was, I think, something like 20% AI. And so they actually went into their own writing and whittled it down, sculpted it, revised it until that number went down to zero. So we have students proactively changing their own voice. If we're trying to teach voice and agency in the world, that culture of sort of, I will detect you and catch you is actually leading to some other impacts that we may not even hear about unless we do talk to students. All right, so let's start with course policies. So this is a scenario that I often like to use with the cards, actually. So I'll invite groups of tables to hold cards in their hands, present a scenario, and talk about how would you approach this scenario? What kinds of values would you lean in with? And so this is, we think about course policies, how will our students use AI? But what I'm hearing from students is that how are my faculty using AI? How are my instructors using AI? And so this is something that is happening across the world right now. You've got midway through the term, you learn that a department head has filed or from your department head that a student has filed a report against you saying they were misled. They say, I think my instructor is using AI to grade, to create slides. It feels like they just kind of displaced themselves. And I'm paying a lot for this education. If AI is doing this, what am I paying for? Um, and so challenging folks to um, kind of think about that scenario and how would you respond or proactively address the scenario so that it wouldn't happen. Um, and so then we go through some of the cards. For instance, this is also a new card. It's a lot of text, but I'll explain it. Essentially, it's just the responsibility card. And it's a multi-sided card where, depending who's looking at it, it may be a student or it may be an instructor. Just speaking to that mutual responsibility we have of using AI in a responsible way that supports learning in the class. For students, we can say, am I using this in my coursework because it's really improving my learning? Or is it just offloading time, saving my time and effort by offloading my work? How would my instructor feel if they saw me using AI? And for teachers, of course, when I'm developing course materials using AI, when I'm thinking of activities, when I'm maybe creating rubrics, how would my students feel if they saw me using AI this way? Trying to foster some discussion. So that's a card I might actually invite faculty to bring into the classroom on day one, week one, and have that conversation with students. And it's a quote from Mark Watkins, who's been doing a lot of great work thinking about how do we create a framework for faculty of appropriate use in the classroom. Of course, the other big one here is transparency. So the transparency card just reminds you if you want your students to be transparent about using AI, you want to model that for students. You want to create that transparent culture. And so at the bottom here, you'll see I recommend having some sort of faculty disclosure statement in your syllabus. So this can include what you will use AI for, and then importantly, what you won't use AI for and why. So something like, my ultimate goal is to support your learning and growth in this course. In order to do that, there may be times where I use AI to develop diverse examples so I can speak to a range of learners. I might use AI to brainstorm activities to make sure that we have an engaging and exciting time together. I might use AI to make my course materials more accessible for you, but I also won't use AI to offload my presence. I'm here for you and your learning. I won't use AI to automate qualitative feedback on your writing because, whatever it is, really laying that out for students. And of course, referring them to that throughout the term is a really useful. You may also provide short little disclosures in class if you did use AI. If folks really like an activity that you did and you can joke about how AI helped you with that, just trying to make it normalized to share. Because a lot of the time we'll see, an instructor says, I told them, just cite it. And I won't, punish them, but they need to cite it and no one's citing it. I think the other thing to remember here, bringing us to the top, is that our students don't know how to cite it, really. They need that extra guidance. So whether you're creating a template for them to help facilitate that disclosure, even something that can be attached to an assignment, each assignment may have a different reflection question. What was really frustrating? If you used AI, what was the most frustrating thing? Um, or what is the most interesting thing you've learned? Or did you feel yourself offloading something? How did you kind of rein it back in and get control of your thinking? So trying to structure it where possible through templates and forms, even Google Forms, can be helpful. And then when we think about course policies of generative AI use, I also wonder if there's more of an opportunity to bring students into that process. How can you create community agreements with your students about responsible AI use? So the trust card provides a few of those examples, what it might look like. And of course, this agreement would be between instructor and student. So the faculty would be agreeing to this as well. And I think that's important because it's sort of a mutual agreement and can build some community. So something I like to do, you may not want to start from scratch because that can take a lot of class time and our students may not know what to say, is you might prepare, uh, 7 or 8 community agreements and present those to students on the first day of class and give them a chance to turn to a partner. And this is called the add, edit, amplify activity. And you can simply invite them to look at the list and say, what do you want to add to this list? What's missing? What do you want to edit about the wording of this list? Maybe there's a thing they want to change about an existing agreement. and then amplify which one of these are the most important to you and your group. And you have a classroom discussion. So you can still allow that student agency and co-creation without starting from scratch. And then inviting students to return to these throughout the term, crucially. What's one of these that you're upholding this term particularly well so far? What's one you want to return to over the next few weeks and really make sure you do, um, uh, you know, enhance your learning by doing a better job at upholding this? And this is something I've been doing for years, not about AI, but just in general, of how we relate to one another. And it's kind of cool. I started it back at Northwestern University when I was getting my PhD with students. I started it and I've been kind of building on it ever since. So the current list that I have uh, is there's sort of a history there of conversations with students in various classes. So that's just a word about course policies. We get into assessment. And of course, this is another scenario you might find, which essentially just says, all of a sudden you've got a student who's been struggling, but all of a sudden they write this really, really solid, complete work. And you think AI wrote it, you don't know for sure, and you don't exactly know what to do, right? You don't know whether you should talk to that student, whether you should just leave comments about um, maybe how it meets or doesn't meet the course learning outcomes, whether to get in contact with the academic misconduct office. And so we know this is maybe representing the suspicion that there is this cognitive crutch happening. This idea that there's unrestricted use of Gen AI can actually help the student do that task, but they actually haven't learned it. So that it's leading to this crutch where when we remove that skill and knowledge actually isn't there. Another term we're seeing is metacognitive laziness. Just this idea, I don't know if I don't like that term, honestly, but this idea that we're losing sense of thinking about thinking as well. This idea of being able to understand, what am I doing in this moment? How am I processing this information? What is my plan moving forward? How am I monitoring how I use AI? So this is a very important concern to be having. And that brings us to the friction card, right? And this is one thing I suggest that all faculty try is just take one of your assignments. Maybe it's something for next week. What are you teaching next week? Upload it to Gen AI, and your goal is to try to create a passable, satisfactory assignment and totally offload learning. Maybe it's one or two prompts. You're really not trying to work hard. You're trying to just get it done and learn from Gen AI what is good. What is Gen AI good at in terms of completing my assignment? What is it not so good at? What is it missing? And as I do this, reflecting on, okay, if Gen AI can do this, um, what is the real learning opportunity? How can I include more moments of what we call productive friction, that struggle, that sort of tension, where a student might get something wrong or they might not know what to do, um, and kind of navigate that friction. I think this is maybe what we've gotten used to in higher education. We've done a really good job of having an assignment. It assesses a learning outcome. Students create a product, and that's the item that we assess to determine whether this student has demonstrated those skills and knowledge. And generative AI is complicating that. We can no longer look at a product and say, these skills are evidenced here. Um, I'll skip that one for a minute. But this is maybe more of the reality, right? Learning is actually a really messy process. There is so much going on that we don't even see in that product. Students may be setting goals, they may be breaking down the task because they're confused. They may be trial and error, or they may be, asking questions about their projects or the task. They may be comparing different examples, iterating after they make a mistake, making decisions about how to move forward and evaluating their first try. There's so much going on there that we don't even see. And so the question becomes kind of, how do we assess and preserve that mess, right? And so another point about this line between, assignment and product. This is a new card. It's one of my favorite cards, but it's the efficiency card. And at the bottom, we say, is efficiency really a human value? Maybe in some cases, maybe not in some cases. In terms of learning, efficiency is not really a human-centered value. Learning is not better when it happens more quickly, which is a quote from John Warner. I also like to invite folks to think about the most important things in their lives, like a vacation or a relationship or something they enjoy. Would you use the word efficient to describe those things? It's a very efficient relationship I have with my mother. But I mean, I wouldn't, maybe you would. But how can we really reflect on what we mean by efficiency and unpack that term? And the other thing is, um, as I mentioned, a lot of the times when we're working with other people, efficiency for one person actually makes more work for the team. So I don't know about you, but sometimes I get work from colleagues and it seems like it's AI generated slop. And it actually, if my task is to leave feedback on that, it actually causes me more work. So kind of adjusting for what we mean by efficient in multiple ways. And so learning isn't efficient all the time, right? And we don't want it to be. We want that friction. And then once they have a product, in terms of our assessment design, we may need to be asking our students to actually explain, almost like we do for a PhD defense, kind of explain your thinking. Walk me through your argument. Why did you pick these sources that you did? Um, what were some of the challenges you experienced? So we're reflecting on the experience of learning. They're justifying some of the decisions you made. So this reassessment or redesign of assessments, for instance, let's look at an annotated bibliography. If we know generative AI is really good at synthesizing and summarizing information, create a one paragraph summary of this peer-reviewed article. How does the annotated bibliography change? What are we really trying to assess there? Maybe we are trying to assess more, how is your research question evolving as you read more of these essays? How is this impacting the kinds of questions you're asking? Or maybe what's an essay that you didn't choose to include and why? You may have students pair up for a peer podcast, sharing their projects, getting excited about their projects, and then speaking to some of the research they've done, and how those different articles are impacting their research trajectory. Oh, the other one I wanted to share there is there a way they can share their product with someone other than you as the instructor? So when we think about motivation, we think about minimizing busy work to proactively disincentivize cheating. Is there a way we can create a course community where students are actually feeling this excitement about sharing their work with another person? Maybe it's with the public community, maybe it's with the classroom community. You can invite different folks from campus to see their work. Maybe it's a gallery walk format, or a more authentic format like a professional expo or panel or something like this, to try to get students feeling like their work matters. That's another important part of this process. So, of course, one card like the perspective card points out, we can actually use AI to preserve friction and maybe even enhance friction in the process. So if you're developing a thesis statement, for instance, and of course my background is in the humanities and media and writing, so that's kind of where I start. But if you've got a hypothesis or an engineering design pitch, um, you might actually have students upload that work in progress to AI and ask for specific counter arguments, um, critical lenses that they've overlooked, people that would be affected that they haven't thought about, and actually get them to sit with some of those difficult perspectives that they haven't addressed. Of course, that's got to be kind of scaffolded as an instructor, right? It may be an at-home activity. You provide students with a prompt, or you provide students with an agent or a gem or whatever it may be. They do the activity and they bring it to class together to discuss, um, and kind of calibrate that experience. So when we're using AI, we want our students to view it as a learning experience that they're reflecting on and that they're processing, and helping to guide that metacognition together as a class can be helpful. Because another part here is that it's going to be very easy for students to feel like they're certain about a direction when they use Gen AI and they get a certain response. Maybe if it's three ideas, they're getting those three ideas. They may get this sense of what we call artificial certainty. And this is a really interesting article that just came out It's focused a bit more on like urban design using AI to envision different spaces, but they've found that there is this tendency when um, uh, AI tools visualize or make known certain options that we're more likely to kind of think of those future options as knowable and predictable and concrete. And that's the direction we should move, right? So the skill of remaining uncertain in this moment is going to be critical for our students. Um, Even when they're interacting with AI, remaining uncertain about what they get. And that's why the inquiry card, is another kind of friction where we're asking students not to focus on driving Gen AI into any sort of direction, and turning in that output, but we're actually asking them to reflect on the questions they're asking. What question would you ask to deepen this output from AI? What assumptions are being made by AI, and how might I ask follow-up questions to get more insight into those assumptions? Okay, so really documenting the process of asking questions can be really helpful as well. And then, of course, process, designing assessments that invite multiple submissions so we can check in with students throughout the process. I'm going to move a little quickly through some of these. I feel like many generative AI talks talk about process over product, but really inviting our students to view that learning as a process that they can get excited about and they can take some ownership over as well. Now, there may be times where you don't want students to use AI. And so I want to just drop this with everybody to think about voice, the student's voice. Something I like to do is voice memo responses rather than having weekly reading reflections, for instance. Just inviting students to take out their phone, record a 1 to 2 minute voice memo of their reaction to the reading, and extend it to one concept in their life, or that they kind of make a connection between course concepts, how they see the reading extending their thinking. I get to listen to those before class, so I know what students have talked about already, and that can shape the conversations we have together. You might also look at screencast explanations where students are simply explaining a problem, maybe a math worksheet, linear algebra, for instance. Um, and here's kind of my process. Here's why I made this decision. Students can view those together, and do peer reviews of those as well, or interactive oral assessments, which of course I think can take many different forms. It may be as simple as, if you're working with written work or a portfolio, you schedule 10 minutes with a student. Of course, there are logistical challenges for this, but you schedule 10 minutes with a student to kind of explain their work, or defend their work. You may also, for instance, if I'm teaching computer science, I might hand a student a piece of code and say, clearly this code is faulty. How might you begin approaching or troubleshooting this problem? Right? This can be a very quick conversation with students. And this is, of course, a new way of assessing for many of our students, at least here in the United States. We don't do this very often. So taking the time to give students a chance to practice in an ungraded setting, of course, is important there to make them feel comfortable. All right. So I'm going to skip through some of these. I got too many ideas here. I want to make sure we have time. The last one I want to focus on is relationships. Okay. So how do we redesign our relationships together in the age of AI? Because we know that students are using AI for emotional support. We know that they are um, sort of having different types of companionship with these tools, whether it's mental health or, what should I be doing in this social interaction, sharing some inventing with our AI systems. And we do have, at least in the United States, right, we have a loneliness crisis. We have social isolation. We have sort of difficult, part of this is all my own opinion. We have difficulty forming community in this country sometimes. So we need to be aware of this impact and how it impacts learning. Another way to phrase this is, if I have this AI tool, why would I raise my hand in class and risk being shamed for not knowing an answer, or feeling like I'm outed as a novice, when I can just ask AI separately? Why should I get to know my students, my student peers, the people sitting next to me? Why does it matter? Or why do I go to office hours across campus when I can just ask AI and not have to actually have that social friction, right? There's a friction that comes with engaging with others as well. And that's something we need to answer as educators. You'll see AI advertisements kind of trying to step into this space. This is an AI wearable called Friend, where you wear this around your neck and it's your friend. It listens to you, it responds to you, and supports you. And so, in the New York Times and in the New York subway, some of these advertisements were subject to graffiti and sort of a debate about what friendship is and what being human is, which is only going to continue, of course. We know from decades of research that these relationships with peers, with students and staff colleagues, with faculty, these are the foundation of learning, belonging, and achieving in college. We know that they support motivation, perseverance, and learning. And so if we are scaling and we are offloading those social relationships, what happens to our classroom communities? And that's why a lot of the cards in these decks, and on the side of the card deck, it actually says trust students, build community. That's kind of my guiding um, motto for teaching and learning. So if you're going to use AI, one way that I would like you to use AI is just to upload a lesson plan into AI and say, what are a few ways I could bring more joy into this experience? What are a few ways I could strengthen the relationships here between my students and I in this moment? Or how can I build more care into my syllabus so that it feels more welcoming? It feels like a space where students want to be. And so that's the kind of use of AI that I think we're maybe missing a little bit of. And obviously, this, again, it's a card deck. So I'm hoping that we have a human first approach to these questions too. We come together and share ideas with each other. So the last slide, I just kind of distilled all these ideas, right? Where can we embed activities for students to explain their thinking to us, to justify their choices, and to answer questions about their work with others? A Q&A during a student presentation is a great, simple way to start that process. Um, there's a piece in the Chronicle of Higher Education that came out by James Lang that says, if you care about it, do it in class. And I think that's a really nice reminder that we have the opportunity to not have students' first engagement with a concept happen in class, but to actually bring skills practice into class. So if I'm wanting to teach the skill of close reading, print out a few passages and invite students to do that together, to practice that skill. When you are using AI in the class, please do model that for students in real time. Show students how you're using it, but then have it be an experience that they then reflect on and even compare experiences, right? If you've got students doing that perspective activity where they get feedback, have them compare that and debrief and calibrate. You might want to invite students to actually interrogate AI as a cultural text through bias or sustainability, or even just the media messages around AI, or data privacy. You might ask students to say, what do you know about me? Or, if you're a third party advertiser, what data do you have of mine? Just starting to have those interrogation mindsets. And then when in doubt, have our students using it collectively. The moment you bring in two humans for think, pair, share with AI, the moment you bring in those two humans, already you've got more friction, you've got more disagreement, you've got more ideas about what AI is putting out, and that can help us build those critical skills. And please do build community, of course, in your class. And last but not least, do give yourself some grace. This is a new card, but it's the humility and grace card, and we are all figuring this out together. Um, a lot of the articles I cited, there's still things coming out about their methodologies and so forth that we need to be critiquing and what they can claim and not. Um, give yourself, this is a moment to try some things out, to make some mistakes, to be okay feeling frustrated by what we're being asked to do, but then try to hopefully find some solidarity and community in that process. So I'll stop there. I know I went over time a little bit, but I really appreciate you giving me a chance to kind of share my thoughts with you.